Welcome to Measurably Better Learning, the podcast built for learning and development professionals. Whether you're an instructional designer, L&D professional, or corporate leader, get ready for insights and ideas that will transform your approach to learning, training, and development. So let's dive in.
Welcome to the Measurably Better Learning podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Taylor, with co-host Dr. Jerry Zanstra today. And we are in part 2 of our learning science sort of series that we have going on. So let's kind of catch our listeners up real quickly, Jerry. This is just going to be hard, but in it like a sentence, can you summarize what we mean by learning science before we tackle one specific one?
Seems like you're accusing me of being verbose, which I am by making that comment. Yeah, so the learning sciences are, or the sciences of learning, however you want to think about this, is a grouping of sciences that help inform those of us who have committed our lives to creating learning experiences for people. And so the sciences, there can be many of them. The ones that we're focusing on are cognition, psychology, sociology, linguistics, consumer sciences, and behavioral sciences. So we'll be writing articles about this and having conversations about it.
Yeah, we're both excited about this. It's kind of a passion of ours, something we apply every single day. But today our focus is on cognition, and I think that's a nice word to sum up. There's a lot of, brain science, science, right? And again, I've said this before, we aren't necessarily certainly not like neuroscientists, at least I'm not. You might have that degree. Got a lot.
Not that I recall.
Right. Which says something.
You got the joke, right?
Yeah,
okay. Thank you.
So cognition, what is cognitive science? And
Yeah, it's how we receive information. It's how we process it. It's how we retain it, because there is a pile of data that we get all the time that we don't process.
Right.
There's a whole bunch that we don't retain, certainly, and then use it. So not only do we retain it, but how do you draw it back out and make decisions based on the things that you know? So it's fascinating, very, very early in the science, and but a really interesting concept.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've addressed this, that it is very early on.
Yeah,
and we're just scratching the surface, just starting to learn. But I love that so much of it, and this kind of gets at my next question. I guess it's one thing to theoretically understand that, but how does cognitive science really fit in with as we think practically about building learning experiences?
Sure.
Are there a few kind of sort of key topics we want to think about in that?
Yeah. I mean, one of them is certainly cognitive overload. People talk about this a lot. And I mean, you remember the early days of e-learning. I was like, 60 minutes seems like a perfectly reasonable time to sit in front of your computer. At that point, we weren't really thinking about cognitive overload. We weren't thinking about, the brain needs a minute sometimes. As I get a little older, I find that those minutes get longer. I need, but it's not even a physiological thing. It's like, just a minute, I need to think about that for a minute before you throw something else at me. And I find I read slower because I like to think deeper. And so but if you're just throwing facts at me and I haven't reflected or contemplated them or thought about how they might apply to my job or my life, it's going to go probably in one ear and out the other. So cognitive load is a lot. Retention is a huge question. I've got, 15 things to learn in the right order so I can do my job. Giving me the list, okay, you create a little e-learning module, okay. I've passed some sort of quiz, okay, but I need a visual reinforcement, or I need to go and have an augmented reality experience or a virtual reality experience so that I can develop the muscle memory. I mean, all of those things are things wrapped into cognition.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I think cognitive overload is one that I think even to this day, we still sort of, we just miss at times because we are anxious to get a lot of things conveyed, and the world is a lot more sophisticated, so we can design modules that look amazing, but we have to think about how much can be retained and in that given moment, how much thought needs to be given to it before we move on. So
I think, too, that part of our role, our listeners are familiar with this, they just need a 90-minute module, right? Because somebody who knows. So I think part of our role is to push back and to apply good and say, wait a minute, that's bad learning science. If you simply want to check the box thing, roll right through it, you're going to have frustrated learners. They're going to hate learning. If you really want them to retain this, we have to think strategically about how we're going to break that apart. And I think that's really where instructional designers can be forces for good in their organization to go, that's a really bad idea. And I'm an expert, so I need to tell you, that's a really bad idea. Here's how we're going to do that.
Yeah, I think we push back often in this area. I'd say sometimes more than anything else, because there's a difference. I say this a lot. There's a difference between marketing or advertising and learning. So you think about what appears on your TV screen or your phone or YouTube, and it's just like constant change. That's a whole different goal and objective. Trying to help somebody learn and retain material and have behavioral change or attitude change or we want to move on and think about how these changes affect our world. So when we come back, let's kind of move into that area.
Okay.
Imagine a world where every training session, every learning module, and every translated document is aligned with your company's unique goals and global ambitions. Welcome to Ingenuity, where we don't just talk about elevating your corporate learning, we make it happen. At Ingenuity, we understand the heart of your business is its people. That's why we specialize in creating custom learning solutions and translation services that are not just effective, but are designed specifically for your business's global needs. Let us show you how learning cannot be just better, but measurably better, with solutions tailored just for you. Learn more in the description below. All right, well, welcome back. I think we ended venturing into some practical things, but when we think about cognition, how should that, maybe I should say, affect the learning and development professional and the world that they're in? I know you have quite a few ideas, and I think they're really important, so I want to give you a lot of time to talk about those.
I think the first one is speed, right? At what speed are you receiving the information that you're, or at what speed are you pushing information out? I have a couple of particular relatives who are fast talkers, and I find it very hard to comprehend what they're saying. And so I think if it goes too fast, you don't comprehend. If it goes too slowly, you lose interest. You're bored, right? So finding that, and again, in a multinational company with 32 different languages, it's really important that we're attentive to the speed at which people speak and can learn. The spacing, right? How often are you reinforcing this? And what's the space between reinforcement? And so, Eberhaus, not even going to use his name, Ebing, anyway, German. It's not. No, it's not. Yeah. The German theorist talked about how often you reinforce something.
Oh, yeah,
and then
30, 60, 90.
Yeah, and then how your retention improves over time. And those are really interesting things to think about. How will most learning isn't a one-time event. I mean, you spend enough time in the classroom, a huge chunk of it is repeating, reinforcing. It's as you change somebody's abilities and knowledge centers. We talked about, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I think that is a key one because that we can, as learning and development professionals, push back as we need to, because we do get those requests that are crisis. We failed this compliance thing or whatever. Make us a module, crank it out, great. Everyone took it off my desk, checked off, move on. And that's our job to say, hey, hold on. Do we want real change here? If so, how are we going to follow it up?
Yeah. Do you actually plan for this to make a difference? Because if you don't, that's a good way to go. Yeah.
Anyway.
We've touched on it a little bit. Giving people time to reflect and to think is a really good cognitive thing. Fatigue. We've talked about this. Fatigue. I'm tired, right? You saw this in the classroom. If students came in the morning exhausted, they hadn't eaten, they had 4 hours of sleep, learning is going to be really, really tough. It's the same with adults. I mean, if they're physically exhausted, or they're just exhausted by whatever it is you're telling them, they're not going to retain well. I think this gets to motivation, so it's going to touch in psychology a little bit, but the idea of just in time, I will learn something if I need to know it. If you're telling me something that I may need to know someday, hopefully I retain some of that.
Right.
But if I have a problem, and this is YouTube, right? This is why YouTube is wonderful. I can find how to get that little ring off my tractor tire because I can't figure it out. I don't want the history of the tractor. I don't want the history of the tire or where rubber comes from. I just want that little snippet of thing that's going to solve my problem right now. If we can connect into that, I think that's really good. Learning setting, you and I have talked about this. It's, most of us have places where we read. I have a wintertime reading thing because we live in Michigan, and I have a really nice summer spot where I read. And it's almost like when I sit there, I go, I should have a book in my hands because I'm supposed to be reading right now. And so those are big things. Connecting to what people already know in cognitive science is a very big deal. So understanding where your learners actually are, and then you're just, we talked a little bit about scaffolding, take them to the next place and sort of remove some of that, take them to the next place and remove a little bit of that. I think those are some wonderful techniques.
When you explain them in those kinds of terms, like, oh yeah, whereas I think sometimes when we read a textbook or tend to get into the more theoretical, we have a hard time applying it. But I think about fatigue, I know almost instantly what you're saying and how I can modify my practices. So thank you. I guess I have one question that's kind of left, and that is, we are a global company, and we always want to come back to that. But how does cognition, how do we think of that in a global setting? Or any specifics you want to think about?
Well, I think there's some generalities you can start with, some of the stuff we've already mentioned. But then thinking particularly about a unique culture. What is unique to and this is where we're getting into sociology and psychology. But, linguistics is going to play a very large part in determining what people can process, retain, spit back to you, and then put in practice. The linguistics really, really matter. And then the design, the colors, the shapes, and as you're going through the development process and you're putting all of this together, for whom are you putting it together? What are some of their unique cognitive challenges and what opportunities do you have to serve them well?
Well, thank you so much, Jerry, for digging into cognition and in a way that I think we can all understand. So I really appreciate that, and I look forward to our conversations on future learning science.
Yeah, I look forward to me asking you questions. So, yeah. Before we wrap up the show, if you're looking to dive deeper, we've got tons of free downloads, L&D resources, and details about upcoming webinars that you won't want to miss. They're found in the episode description. Plus, if you ever want to chat with either one of us, now's your chance. You can find links in the episode description to connect directly with Miriam or me. We're here to answer your questions and to discuss all things learning and development. And speaking of questions, we love hearing from you. Whether it's a question or a comment or a topic you're curious about, or if you just want to join the conversation, drop us a comment on your favorite social media channel. Your input shapes our shows. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. It's the best way to ensure you never miss out on our latest episode. We're excited to continue to transform learning into a measurable success with you. Until next time.